Hey guys, here we are. We are back with another episode of Harbor Me. This is the new book by Jacqueline Woodson that we have been reading. We're not very far into it, right? We're only at like chapter 5. These chapters are really short, not a lot of information. But what we do know is pretty cool. So far, what we know is that at this school, there was like this experiment that happened. And they decided that this group of kids might work better together if they were in one room together. And so things that we know about this is that they don't learn the same as other people. Um, so I don't know if that like makes them. I don't know what that means yet. We don't know anything really about it, but we're starting to kind of meet these characters and who they are and what they do. And so one of the characters, well, we just found out that the person that's like narrating, so whose voice we're listening to, is a girl. I had thought it was a boy, but it's actually a girl, and she's got a friend named Holly. We know that. We know that there's a character named Esteban, and Esteban's dad is missing. We don't have any information about that. We just know that he's missing. I had made a note in my reader's log that I thought maybe this was like an ICE related thing. Maybe dad was undocumented and ICE picked him up because they don't know who he is or where he is. And he doesn't talk about like the cops arresting him. He talks about that he is just missing, um, which I know just because of background knowledge that I know that sometimes that happens with ICE, that they come in. That's the immigration um, enforcement agents, right? Um, and so sometimes that happens with ICE and the people just kind of disappear. Um, but we don't really know. We don't know for sure what the deal is. Um, what are other things that we know? We know that the main character, we don't know her name, but we do know that her dad was arrested and has been gone for 8 years. The uncle came in, and uncle took over after dad got arrested. And then at the beginning of the book, do you remember? Like it talked about they were talking, and uncle was moving out, and so she was really upset about that because that's the only person she's ever known. So uncle's excited because he gets to kind of go and be a bachelor, right? Sounds like he took on the responsibility of his brother's children to take care of them when his dad got arrested. And we don't know anything about that, like what he did or anything. It doesn't matter. What else do we know? Oh, and then we know that there's a kid named Amari, and Amari is showing right now a whole lot of empathy. He is the only one that keeps coming up to Esteban, who's very upset about his dad disappearing. Um, and he keeps coming up to him and making sure he's okay. Okay, so we like that. That is showing empathy, and we love that, right? All right, chapter 5. It's so hard to keep these short, by the way, because they're so good that I kind of want to keep reading. Oh, Miss Laverne. So they have a class, and it's like these kids have been separated, right? And they're together in this class, and they call it the art class, where they can just talk. There's not a teacher there to listen to them talk. But right now, Miss Laverne, their teacher, had asked them to like pick up all their stuff and go, and follow her, and so that they were going to go somewhere new. All right. So when we got to room 501, Miss Laverne opened the door and held it for us. Nobody knew what to do, so we just walked in and stood there. The room was bright and smelled like it had just been cleaned with the same oil soap my dad used on our floors. Back when me and Holly were in third grade, it had been the art room. But then someone gave our school enough money to open up a whole art studio in the basement. So now this was just a room we passed by sometimes and said to each other, "Remember when that used to be the art room?" "Welcome to room 501," Miss Laverne said. Holly ran ahead, and the rest of us followed and looked around. In the old art room, there was just a few of those chairs with swing up desks in a circle, a teacher's desk with no chair, a big clock on the wall, and some little kids' ancient paintings of a bright yellow sun thumbtacked to the closet door. Esteban asked, "Are we getting transferred to a new class?" He put his knapsack down between his ankles and hugged himself. Amari had taken his arm off Esteban's shoulder, but was still standing close to him. When Esteban shivered, Amari put his arm back. I heard him whisper, "It's all good, bro. It's all good. Miss Laverne's not taking us somewhere we don't want to be." Miss Laverne sat on the edge of the teacher's desk and folded her arms. "Every Friday, from now until the end of the school year, the six of you will leave my classroom at 2 p.m. and come into room 501. You'll sit in this circle and you'll talk. When the bell rings at 3, you're free to go home." "Why can't we just talk in our regular classroom?" Holly asked, hopping up onto the teacher's desk. "I mean, in your classroom." Our regular classroom wasn't regular. We knew that. But still. "Down from there, please, Holly." Miss Laverne waited for Holly to jump off again before she continued. "I don't want to hear what you have to say to each other. This is your time, your world, your room." "Sounds like you're trying to get an early break from us," Holly said. "Give yourself your own kind of half day." Miss Laverne laughed. "One day, Holly, your brain will be very useful to you." Holly looked like she wasn't sure if our teacher was complimenting her. "What I'm trying to do is give you the space to talk about the things kids talk about when no grown-ups are around. Don't you all have a world you want to be in that doesn't have people who look like me in it?" "Nope," Amari said. "Yeah," Ashton said, "not really. We like being with you," I added, "in the other room." "You like what you know," Miss Laverne said. "You like what's familiar." Oh my gosh, you guys. This just makes me think, and I'm so sorry I'm going squirrel here, but it kind of makes me think about distance learning, right? We like what we know. We like what is familiar. We like being in a classroom together. We like being at school because that is what we know. Distance learning, this is different. This isn't what we know, right? Normally, I would be sitting in the front of the classroom on a stool, reading this out loud to you, and you're all there where you can all make comments in real time, and you're all forced to listen to me. Right now, you're being told you have a choice and you're being independent, and it's different. It's the same content coming to you, but in a different way. So, makes me wonder, do you have a hard time with this because it's unfamiliar or because it's really that much more challenging? And is it that much more challenging? Or is it just that it's not something we know yet? Wonder. Something to think about. Back to the story. None of us said anything. She was right. What was wrong with liking familiar things? "Nothing's wrong with that," Miss Laverne said, being a teacher slash mind reader. "But what's unfamiliar shouldn't be scary, and it shouldn't be avoided either." I'm going to say the same thing about distance learning. "But I don't know what we're even supposed to talk about," Chiago said. "Like schoolwork and stuff? And to who? Schoolwork, toys, TV shows, me, yourselves, anything you want to talk about. To each other. And it's to whom, Chiago?" "To whom?" Chiago said to himself like he was practicing it. "To whom?" I think any other bunch of kids would have started happy dancing and acting crazy because they weren't going to be any grown-ups around, but we weren't any other kids. I heard Amari say, "That's stupid," so quietly that I wondered if I was hearing things. Then he said, "We could be talking in class if we wanted to be talking. You trying to change the art room into the ARTT room, a room to talk?" "That's right," Ashton said. He and Amari pounded fists. "I like that." Miss Laverne clapped once and pointed at Amari. "You are brilliant." "I could have come up with that." Holly rolled her eyes. "I could have added an R and thrown an acronym out there." She said acronym loudly, making sure Miss Laverne heard. "Nice use of the word, Holly," Miss Laverne said. "Okay, so because the art room is now the ARTT room, no one gets in trouble for talking here. You get in trouble for talking out your phone. You get in trouble for taking out your phone. You get in trouble for being disrespectful. How are you going to know if you're not in here with us? Amari asked her. All know. And we all knew she was telling the truth. Teachers knew things. That's all there was to it. Well, what if I don't have anything to say to anybody? Amari asked. Miss Laverne laughed again. Since when do you not have anything to say, Amari? She shook her head and waved her hand to include all of us. I can't believe you are so resistant. I am giving you an hour to chat. You get in trouble for this every single day. How many times do I have to say no talking? Now I'm saying talk. Amari tried to hide his smile, but he didn't do a great job of it. Okay, I'm vibing it. The old art room is the new ARTT room, y'all. And I bet you can draw in there too, if you want, Ashton said to him. Miss Laverne nodded. Draw, talk, and yes, Amari, the ARTT room is beyond clever. Like I said, anybody could have thought of that, Holly said. Yeah, but I see you didn't, Amari said. And like I said, Miss Laverne told us, in this room, we won't be unkind. She started it. Doesn't matter, Amari. I just want to get it straight, Ashton said. So school now ends at 2 o'clock on Fridays? He had pale white skin like my uncle, and hair that always fell into his eyes. Even as he asked, he was holding it back with one hand. Once Holly had said to him, Just cut it already, and his ears turned bright red. My own hair had always been bright red, but lately it had started getting darker and kinkier. If Holly's mother didn't braid it for me, I just usually pulled it back into a sloppy ponytail that frizzed all around my face. Geez, Ashton, Holly said, that's not what she's saying. This is not deep, people. I just don't really understand why we're going into another room, Ashton said, by ourselves. Wondering if he's uncomfortable with that. I think looking back on that day now, that's the line that will always stay with me. Another room by ourselves. How many other rooms by ourselves have we walked into since that day? Even if they weren't real rooms and we didn't know what we were doing. I stood there thinking that doesn't make sense to me. Hold on. How many other rooms by ourselves have we walked into since that day? Even if they weren't real rooms and we didn't know that's what we were doing. I stood there thinking about my father. In 6 months or a year, I didn't know exactly when, I'd be walking into another room, the one where my father lived with me. And as I stood there, Esteban was inside the room where he didn't know where his dad was. He glanced at me. That day, no one but Holly knew that my dad was in prison. I felt like I was betraying Esteban, like I should have been standing next to him saying, Hey, it's gonna be okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't tell the truth about my dad to help him, so I looked down at my skirt and thought about rooms. I wondered about Tiago and Holly, Amari, and Ashton. What were the rooms for them? What did they hide inside those rooms? Another room? I thought. We were always entering another room. That day, Miss Laverne pushed us out from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It felt like an hour passed as she waited for us to say something. I looked at the clock. The second hand made an echoing sound when it ticked. It was 5 minutes past 2. 55 minutes left. You can do this, Ashton. You can all do this, Miss Laverne finally said. And with that, she walked away. With that, she let us go. Chapter 6. We stood around staring at each other. Holly took a seat and patted the one next to it. Haley, sit here. Aha, her name is Haley. The boys took the other seats. Boys against girls is unfair, Holly whispered to me. There's more of them. I've been saying this since school started, and plus, are we going to get tested on this? I smiled. Everything was unfair to Holly. We were both only children, but sometimes I thought maybe she had a bunch of brothers and sisters hidden away because she always felt like someone was trying to cheat her out of something. It's free time, I whispered back. You heard Miss Laverne. This is not going to be a test. Ashton, Chiago, and Amari had pulled their seats farther back, making the circle bigger and lopsided. Esteban's was next to mine. He sat down heavily, put his head on the arm of the desk, and closed his eyes. His lips were chapped, and he had tiny freckles over his nose that I hadn't noticed before. I think that first day in art room, we were all sure his dad would be back soon. Tomorrow, the next day, the next week. None of us really knew about forevers yet. We were still just learning how things could change in a minute, how you could be in the middle of putting plates on the table when the phone rings with bad news, or how your mother could come in and kiss you goodnight, and when you ask, Is Poppy home yet? Your mother says no, but maybe he's working late. And then you wake up in the morning and run into the kitchen, and your father's empty dinner plate is still on the table. Or maybe you go home for the weekend and then school gets closed, right? And you don't get to come back. Things can change in a matter of minutes. That was for me, not the book. I thought about one of those stories just like my uncle. I thought about one of the stories my uncle liked to tell me. Before I went to sleep, he'd kiss my forehead and say, Don't forget the happy ending. The story went like this. Two kids got lost in a forest. First, they came to a snake and asked him the way to go. The snake said, Freedom is through my lair. The kids knew they'd get eaten if they followed the snake. They came to a spider, and the spider said, Freedom is in the center of my web. They knew they'd get eaten there too. Then they came to a wolf, a grizzly, more snakes, and on it went. By the time came to a wild boar, they were tired and hungry and scared. So when the wild boar said, Freedom is inside the thicket of branches where I sleep, they followed him. They had given up and figured it would be fast and maybe not as painful to get eaten by a wild boar. But instead, the wild boar fed them apples and honey. When their bellies were full and their eyes grew heavy, the wild boar covered them with blankets made of leaves stitched together and vines and watched over them while they slept. When morning came, they climbed on his back and he led them home safely. When I asked my uncle what the moral of the story was, he said, No moral, just a happy ending. Amari got up again and pulled his desk close to Esteban's. Your pap'll be home, bruh, he said. I got a feeling. Back then, we still all believed in happy endings. None of us knew how many endings and beginnings one story could have. Okay, I'm going to read one more chapter. Chapter 7. One Saturday morning, every other month, my uncle drove the two of us 7 hours to Malone, where my dad was in prison. On the first Saturday in October, my father refused to come down to the visiting room. My uncle and I waited. Time passed, and my uncle paced and asked the guards what was happening. Finally, after I don't know how long, we got in the car and drove the 7 hours back to Brooklyn. Okay, so they're in New York. On the ride home, I thought about how even our brains have rooms. We could put stuff in those rooms we don't have to think about or remember. I decided I was going to put us sitting in that overheated waiting area into a room and lock the door. But that night, when my uncle came in to tell me a story and kiss me goodnight, he said, Your dad's afraid. He hasn't been on the outside in 8 years. That's a long time. But it's not our fault, I said. The rule is every other month he sees us, and if he won't see us, how are we going to help him get ready for the outside, for coming home? My uncle sat on the edge of my bed. I was staring at the wall and wouldn't turn around towards him. The anger inside me was fire. It was flames and ash, too. That's beautiful. The anger inside me was fire. It was flames and ash, too, so it was burning things down. Look at me, my uncle said. I shook my head. How could my father just sit in his cell? How could he choose sitting in a tiny cell over being in a room with us, with his brother, his daughter, his family, the only family he had left? Haley, I'm serious, my uncle said. Look at me. I turned toward him and pulled the covers up over my face. Haley, what? I snatched the covers below my chin and glared at him. What do you want? My uncle's voice stayed calm. He pressed his pointer finger between my eyebrows. So he's like, I want you to know that we are all flawed, he said. We all have those days we just don't want to show up. Days we just want to forget the world. Doesn't make us bad people, just makes us people. And time moves as it moves. In a month, this moment won't be anything. But he didn't even want to see us after we drove all the way up there. That's not right. My uncle didn't say anything. My dad was his big brother. He always said that my dad had been his hero when they were kids, that he used to follow my dad everywhere. He can't just choose to disappear. He can't just act like he doesn't love me, like I'm not his daughter. He should be running to see me. He does love you, Hales. The night you were born was the first time since we were kids that I saw my big brother cry. When I got to the hospital, you were asleep in your mother's arms. You had on one of those tiny blue and pink caps that they put on newborns. Look at this, your dad whispered, and he gently pulled the cap back to show me your bright red hair. You didn't have a whole lot then, but the room was nearly dark and it glowed. I swear your hair glowed. No, it didn't. I was trying to stay mad, but I couldn't help smiling. I swear, my uncle said, you had glow in the dark hair. Lies. Anyway, your dad pulled the cap back over your head while you and your mom kept on sleeping. Then he took my hand and he pulled me out of the room. I leaned my head against my uncle's chest. I could hear his heart. It was beating fast. He said, she's so tiny, Steve. She's so perfect. Then he put his hand over his face and started sobbing. Those two people in there, they're everything to me. Everything. How am I ever going to? My uncle stopped talking and sniffed. He reached his hand up to his face. I kept my ear pressed to his chest, my eyes closed. I knew he was crying and wanted to let him do it without getting embarrassed. Be the best dad and husband. He asked me how he was going to be the best, and I told him he didn't have to be the best, that nobody was the best. I could feel his chin nodding into my scalp. How many times has he told me this story? Still, I could listen to it for infinity. I told him just to be there, my uncle said, for everything, for every first word and step and first love. Yuck, I said. One day you'll fall in love. Ixnay on the love, uncle. Back to the story, please. You know the story. Still, I said, I want to keep knowing it. My uncle's heart had slowed back down. Outside, a car drove past with its music turned up loud, the noise fading as it moved farther away. Do you remember anything about her? Just that picture, I said, the one where it's the back of her and I can see her hand and her nails. My uncle was quiet for a long time. There had been a flood that ruined 2 computers worth of pictures and a bunch of framed ones. And years later, just before the accident, there had been a small electrical fire that took out the bookshelves where all the photo albums in my uncle's record collection had been. The picture of my mom and dad had been in my father's wallet when he was arrested. The rest, that was up to memory. She was so, so beautiful. My uncle pressed his lips into the top of my head. Then he pulled away and looked at me. You look more like her every day. You know that? I nodded. Yep, you keep saying so. But I look like you and my father, too. I look like everybody. You look like you the most, though, Hales. I yawned as he brushed my hair away from my face with his hand. Hey, I said, can you buy me a voice recorder? I need it for a project for school. How come you just don't use your phone? He asked. Not allowed to. Yeah, sure, I can do that. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, just tired now. He kissed my forehead and turned off the light. Good night, Haley. I love you to the moon. I yawned again, pulled the covers over my head, and said, I love you until Pluto becomes a planet again. All right, I'm going to end there. That was a really nice little moment in this book. All right, so now we know that there's Haley with her like glow in the dark red hair. We know there's Holly. We know there's Amari and Esteban. We know there's Ashton and Chiago. So Haley, Amari, Holly, Esteban, Chiago, and Ashton. That's the 6 of them. Okay. So we're getting little bits and pieces about who they are. In my head now with Haley, I see a girl with flaming red hair. One of the boys has lots of curls that get in his face. I can't remember who it was. I believe Amari is like super dark skinned. That it was almost looked blue under his skin, I think is what the description was of him. So I'm getting those. And Esteban has some little freckles on his nose that she had never noticed before. All right, these are important things to notice and to make pictures of so that when you're reading stories, you can make those pictures in your head. I promised you guys I was going to keep things short, but this is really good. And so I kept reading. All right, I'll try to do better next time.